asking that we will be diligent and that the words of our mouths will be acceptable to God. Morality and character building was an important job of the teacher. So I tell the children it was the job of the school to educate your mind as well as your heart. So I thought that it would be fun tonight for you to join me in learning a little exercise which I use with the children to teach them good character. So we need to use our hands for this. So I want you to put up your left hand and point to your thumb. And each one of your digits will have a word attached to it, which will help you to remember these good character qualities. The first one is truthfulness. Now say that.
Truthfulness.
Okay. We must begin with that. There is no getting on without a love of truth. Do not allow others to be mistaken about you. If you have something to say the truth out boldly. Do not be afraid of the consequences of telling the truth. Now point to your next finger. And the word is honesty.
Honesty.
Be honest. Now to be honest is to be real. It is not to let the outside look smart when the inside is not so. You should remember that if you do not work as hard and as steadily when no one is looking as you do when someone is, then you are dishonest. And we have a big conversation about what happens when the teacher leaves the classroom and you are expected to be doing your work. Okay. The third one, which gives them great difficulty, punctuality. Being punctual. We don't even know what that word means. Remember, if you are late, you will make others late if they wait for you. You must learn to be punctual. So when we do this, they want to say punctuation instead of punctual. All right, the next one is cleanliness.
Cleanliness.
Be clean. Cleanliness is next to
godliness.
Always be fit to be seen. Your room should be clean and neat so that you never have to blush if someone comes in unexpectedly. Be moderate in eating and drinking. Always stop when you have had enough. How many of you in school had to put your hands out and have the teacher look at your nails?
Yes.
And you had to be sure to have a handkerchief? Yeah. The next one, kindness.
Kindness.
Be kind. You can change the worst character by being kind. Be firm in not giving up what you know is right, but be kind. And if you are, you must succeed in the end. Now let's see if we can do all of them together. The first one.
Truthfulness. Honesty. Punctuality. Cleanliness. Kindness.
Very good. Excellent. All right. And then I tell them their homework is to practice that. Learn it, practice it on the bus so that you can remember that. Now there is a special emphasis in those days with recitation and memorization. And I tell the children that, you know, when you didn't have paper and pencil tests, the only way the teacher really could know if you knew the work was if you could stand and recite. So a lot of memory work, learning your textbook. And before the children come to the school, they must memorize something to recite at the end of the day. And because Henry Wadsworth Longfellow lived in the 1800s, I suggest that they learn the Village Blacksmith or the Arrow and the Song. And sometimes it's America and sometimes it's other little ditties that the teacher works with them on. But they all have to learn how to stand straight and tall, not leaning on the desk, not putting your hands in your pockets, speaking to be heard, very important. Okay. Children are reminded that paper was expensive. And so when we write, we mostly practice our work on slates because then when we finish, we can just erase and we can start over. Teachers love the fact that I tell the children that They are not to raise their hand and say, what should I do now? I'm finished. Because you are never finished. If you think you're finished, you erase the slate and start over. And there is complete silence. And the teacher's sitting in the back smiling. So, the children make a copybook before they come. They use the brown paper bag and paper that the teacher supplies. They learn how to line the paper. And this is what we do our penmanship lesson on. And it is extremely discouraging to notice the quality of handwriting. I mean, when we think about how we practice to make those beautiful lines and curves over and over, and this is where we talk about practice makes perfect, because we don't do that anymore. In fact, I have read and heard, there are schools that are no longer teaching handwriting. What a shame. If you want to write a letter to your sweetie, you can't do it because you just don't know how. What a shame. So there we sit with our paper and our ink and our quill pens, and we practice our writing. Children would practice with a dry pen for a long time, going over the letters until the teacher felt that they could handle the ink. Now, even finding liquid ink today is a challenge for me. Very hard. You have to go on the internet and look for it because you just can't go to a store anymore and buy a bottle of ink. So the teacher's job was to harvest those goose quills. A healthy goose could produce about 2 molting seasons a year, could produce about 20 quills, and the teacher would have a pen knife, which was that little tiny knife, and she would make that point and put that slit in the point about 1/4 inch up to hold the ink and keep those pens in good condition. And if most of the time ink was made out of powdered ink, powder that was mixed with water, but if you didn't have that, you could use the swamp maple, and that made sort of a brownish ink, which was extremely indelible, did not come off your fingers or your clothing. And that also worked. Now, books. I love to look at the old textbooks. I have one that was passed down in my father's family. Each child signed their name, and the book is totally threadbare. And I tell the children, this is the way it would look when the 5th child got finished with it, because we didn't get new books every year. Many books were what we call progressive, meaning that you got the book in kindergarten and it kept you going all through school. The spelling book and the arithmetic book could be used for a very long time, and so you did not need a new book every year. How do we provide our books? Parents had to provide them. Until 1870, I believe, Auburn started giving free books, but before that, you had to purchase them yourself or bring what you had from home. And I say to the children, what book do you think every family would have? Dictionary.
A Bible.
Hard to get that word Bible out. Here's a very interesting journal entry telling how one boy figured out how to provide and get his books. Money was very scarce in those days. A boy could not get $1 simply by asking for it, no matter how much he needed it or wanted it. As the school term drew near, every family was concerned as to how the children were to be supplied with books and paper. As I reached the thinking age, I hit upon this plan. Foxes were numerous, and a good pelt would bring $1 or more in cash. Early in the fall, when the fox fur was in its best condition, I hunted for the places where signs of their passing were visible. I asked the children, what would you look for? They always like blood. But if you killed something, there would be blood and bones, so that's good. Okay. One kid actually said scat. Now, isn't that good? I thought that was very good. These are mostly second and third graders too, so every once in a while there's a surprise. Okay, so he looks for places of their passing, and along these runs, I set my little baited trap on the route to the schoolhouse so that I could look after them with no extra trouble on my way to and from school. If I found a fox trapped on my way to school, I hid him under the snow until I returned at night, when often I found one or more trapped in addition. These I carried home and carefully prepared the skins for the market. And when I had a chance, I sent the skins to Portland by some farmer on his way to market, and the money or the needed books were brought back to me. And so that's how one boy figured out a way to get his books, which I thought was quite ingenious. In a little bit more about books, it's kind of interesting. In 1849, they counted up the districts that had a library, and only 17 districts in the whole state of Maine had a library in 1870. And when they counted up all the books in those libraries, there were 452 books altogether. So I tell the children, your library's got lots and lots more than that. And this was from all the libraries put together. A letter written by a former student at West Auburn who attended in 1930 or the 20s made note that money had been raised in earlier years to provide a library in that particular school. And when the students finished their study, they were allowed to walk to the back of the room and take a book off the shelf and bring it back to their seat to read. And he notes in the letter that by the end of 3 years at the school, he was able to read all the books in the library in that particular school. So, very interesting about books. And of course, the content of books, very different from what we're used to. The topic of death is very prevalent in a lot of the books. And when you go to the old cemeteries, children are, I have a junior history club in Minot that I work with, and they are quite amazed at the number of graves that are the graves of children. And we talk about, without medicine, earaches and things today that we take for granted were fatal for many children. And fire and drowning and pneumonia. And so death is very, very commonly dealt with in the books. In other words, very serious, very dark stories in these old reading books. And of course, no colored pictures. So we can't think about the one-room school without thinking about discipline. Kids can't get enough of it, What do you do when the kids misbehave? And why was it so strict? And I tell them that with so many different age levels in the room, you had to have rules. And when rules were broken, there had to be repercussions. So there are some, there's a discussion about what will be done. And boys frequently were the recipients of the corporal punishment, the slaps to the side of the head, the use of the ferrule on the outstretched hand. The ferrule, I guess was like a ruler. I wish I had one of those to show the kids, but I don't. If anybody ever finds one, you can call me. Holding out your hands and having a very heavy book placed on, it doesn't seem like it would be much of a punishment, but if you've ever done that for very long, it is painful to do this. There are circles on the blackboard where children walk up, put their nose in the circle facing the board, and you have to stand there. Embarrassing, very embarrassing to have to do that. Of course, one of the stories that came out of the interviews we did was that the teacher would put the unruly student in the entryway to the school. When you enter that particular school, there's a row of hooks where you can hang your coats, and then there's a door that you go through into the classroom. And the child would be put out in that entryway. And of course, there was no heat out there. So it was not a pleasant place to have to stay. And then I tell the children, news traveled very quickly, because by the time you got home, you could expect to be punished a second time. And there was no question. The parent did not go to the school and say, how dare you punish my child this way. It was understood that the teacher had the control of the classroom, and there was great respect. And I lament the passing of those days. The school day was long. 9 to 4 is a long time. And one of the teachers that we interviewed said that in the years when she was teaching, was around in the 20s, the younger children would be sent home early in the afternoon, and the older ones would remain later and have these subjects like history and geography and things that the little ones wouldn't have. So that was kind of an interesting little tidbit. We have lunch in the room, and we talk about what kind of container you would bring your lunch in, what would you wrap your sandwich in, what would be in your sandwich. No plastic sandwich bags, no plastic bottles, everything homemade, cookies, pie, fruit in season. That is something we just don't think about anymore, that, you know, we can have strawberries all year long. I tell the children, you would only have strawberries when strawberries were in season. And apples, of course, were common. There were recesses, one in the morning and one in the afternoon, 15 minutes, and we talk about what would you play. You look outside the window, there's no equipment, so what would you do? And we talk about hide and seek and tag and all of those things that couldn't be done, and how children would bring some things from home, like marbles and jacks and balls. And then we talk about finding things, making things out of found objects. I tell them, how many of you